All right, I think we're doing it.
We're doing it. Okay, go sit down.
Hello. Hello, I'm down here, right? There we go. I'm going to my chair in the flooded Seine River where I'm going to sit. Where I sat about a month ago to give you a coffee talk. This one has my coffee stains on my notes now because our camera's turned off. But here we are. I am Eric with the Wilderness Committee, and this is the glaring face of climate chaos. I'd like to mention that we are on Treaty 1 territory. This is the homeland of the Métis Nation. The interesting piece of being here, Manitoba, this is what's referred to as the place that the Creator sits. This really was a meeting place for people in Turtle Island, from all over North America. They would journey here and trade, would make their way right here into the heart of Winnipeg, which is the muddy waters. You can see that there's a lot of sediment in this. I want to just give me a thumbs up on the screen there if you guys have some sound, because last time when we tried to broadcast, we didn't have any sound.
It's a little too far away, they said.
Too far from the microphone. Okay, I can see if I can turn the gain up on the microphone. See if that will do what it needs to do. I think this is the gain on the top. Whoa. There we go. How does this sound from there? People are hearing it better. There is a directional, omnidirectional, mono, something or other. I think that's it, what we're looking for right there. So how is that sounding if we can look at our displays? Is that good noise, or do I have to move my chair up too?
I think that's better.
Looks good? Okay, excellent. The story I'd like to tell about this, that I was passed on to me by a friend and talented colleague, Adrian. He talked about being on rivers and talked about having control of rivers so that they're public access. So part of an Indigenous movement to land back is to ensure that we can access rivers all over the place, that all the rivers that we have in Manitoba can be accessed. So when we talk about acknowledging where we are, this piece that I'm sitting on is parked. This piece of the river is accessible. We're at the river house. My house is over there, but this is public access to rivers, very important. From what I've been told by my colleague in terms of Indigenous decolonization, really, is what it is. Got my coffee here, my dad mug again. Now, if you'll recall from a month ago, I was sitting here, I paddled up with my son, we talked about nature and how important it is to be exposed to nature. I got out of the canoe and walked across this dry land to where my potato patch was and my zucchinis and pumpkins growing over there. You'll notice that since then, not once but twice in the last month, my gardens have flooded out down here. And so what we're looking at is, I've been calling it the glaring face of climate chaos here in Manitoba. I keep looking at the microphone. I realize I should be looking at the camera. That's where people are and not the microphone. The first time that we had big problems in Manitoba was in mid-June to late June. Southeastern Manitoba got hit with record rainfall, the area near Gardenton. And so I was watching this, and right around June I wrote an article called The Glaring Face of Climate Chaos in Manitoba, and we've just posted that to our website today. So if you want to flip over there later, there'll be a link in the comments. But really, what we need to talk about is that we need to recognize when we have these extreme weather events that this is the climate chaos, and it's here right now. Now, in the instance of anytime we have rainfall of more than 120 millimeters over a weekend, the drainage system that Manitoba has, some of that imposed because of the things that we've done to the land for agriculture, for development, our drainage system simply can't handle anything of that magnitude. And so we saw this in southeastern Manitoba, and then the rivers came up and flooded in, and my pumpkins actually survived the first flooding, and then the river went back down. But then on Canada Day, A mallard just flew right past Alex's head. On July 1st in the evening, the Manitoba government sent out a extraordinary news release saying that they had lost confidence in the Rivers Dam. Now, Rivers, Manitoba, there's a dam built on the Little Saskatchewan River, and it was done for agricultural reasons, for irrigation reasons. But they had record rainfall in western Manitoba. This is a separate incident from the disaster we'd seen in southeastern Manitoba a couple weeks earlier, and that dam was as full as it's ever been. Now, the minister, in his news conference or news release, called it a 1 in 1,000 year storm. And honestly, that shows how disconnected our elected officials are if they still use that type of language in the climate catastrophe that we're a part of right now. This isn't a 1 in 1,000 year storm. It's like the people who were told this 120 millimeters of rain in western Manitoba in 2014 was, a 1 in 100 year storm, and then it happened the next year. What we have happening is disaster after disaster. And what we see in the province is we're seeing emergencies. We're seeing rural municipalities calling for state of emergencies because they need help with roads that are washing out. They need to access people. They need to, who have been isolated, properties who are isolated. They're looking at whether or not they need to sandbag homes. And in the case of Rivers, Manitoba, downstream, I believe it was 40 property owners had to be evacuated and livestock removed because they didn't think that if there was more rain that dam was going to hold. Now, I journeyed out to western Manitoba on the weekend, and I looked. Now, the water, of course, is down, but areas north of Minnedosa, you could see little coulees, little river valleys that were flooded up 10 and 15 meters. There was a watermark on the trees that has never been there before. There was mudslides and landslides where trees and existing banks were dropped into drainage ditches. So there was huge damage done from that second storm in western Manitoba. And then a few days after that storm in western Manitoba, the Manitoba government again had to set out a heavy rainfall warning for northern Manitoba, getting into the Saskatchewan River and areas near the Paw. Water flowing in from Saskatchewan plus heavy rainfall causing issues up there. So 3 separate times already this summer, it's July 16th, 3 times we've had rural municipalities talking about the states of emergency. This is the glaring face of climate change, and the blog post that I wrote, it calls out 3 things that we need to do. The very first thing, of course, is that we need to call it what it is. We need to talk about it when it happens. Is that climate change is getting worse, the emergencies are getting worse, and they're going to become more costly. So that's one of the first steps. Started a little late here, but I'll try and keep going with my time frame here. So first off, let's call it the climate emergency. In the past, there were people who cast doubt on whether or not we could attribute an individual weather event to climate change, but that scientists have largely debunked that concept. There is definite fingerprints and marks. The Prairie Climate Center in Manitoba, of course, at the University of Winnipeg, they're working on this data, and they are able to say that yes, these storms and this is the hallmark of climate chaos that's approaching and is already here. The piece that Dr. Danny Blair had put out and was speaking about in the media recently was the levels of wind, the high winds that we're getting. Now, some of you may know I have played the ultimate frisbee for a few years, and one of the things that as a team from Winnipeg that we knew how to do was throw in wind. So when we got to other places, teams, if we had a windy day, even the championship in 2009 was a windy, rainy day, and our ability to throw in those crazy winds, it's something that we know here. However, nowadays, we're realizing that wind is way bigger than it used to be. When I was playing, 2 decades ago, the wind that we're seeing now is much greater, and this is what Danny Blair was talking about. So we're seeing it, it's all right here. First step is recognizing it and then talking about it with our colleagues, our friends, our neighbors, the knitting group, the Zoom drinks that we're having with our staff members. We have to acknowledge that it's here and it's causing a problem. The world right now is warmed to roughly 1.1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The path that we're on right now is going to lead us to 2 degrees Celsius, and that's average. Areas to the north, further from the equator, the temperatures are going to go up higher and we're going to see more extreme impacts. So Manitoba is further north. We are definitely going to see more extreme impacts. So warming is going to happen more here. And we need to recognize reality. You know, we have to face reality here that this is here. And we also have to face realities that our current actions are locking in these same weather patterns for at least another decade or maybe two. What we're trying to do right now is change the future, something 10 years down the line, so that it doesn't get that much worse. So we've talked about where we are with 1.1 degrees Celsius. I want to talk a little bit about, so we know that climate change is here. Now let's talk about what we need to do about it. The Manitoba government has released their Climate and Green discussion paper after much work in 2017. 2018, they moved to acts on it. And they set together an advisory committee that they said, our goal, we're going to do these 5-year terms, and in our first term, we're going to limit greenhouse gas emissions equivalents in Manitoba by 1 megaton. And this was what the goal, they came out in 2019, and they said, this is our very first goal till 2022, we're going to limit the emissions by 1 megaton. That's what the Manitoba government has said. In the fall of 2018, at the exact time that Premier Pallister was killing the price on carbon that he had promised us that he was going to introduce, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, came out and said that we had 12 years to act on climate change, or we were going to face catastrophic consequences. This is a worldwide body. More than 100 countries have had input in this and signed off on this message. At the end of the day, what we're being told is we need to get to net zero emissions. That's the essential component, and the faster we get there, the less extreme weather we're going to see. Now, the faster we get to net zero emissions brings me to the second point that I mentioned in this blog post, is that while we have the government saying they're going to reduce emissions by 1 megaton, what we need all elected officials in the province to do is we need them to commit to hitting net zero emissions. Now, we don't have elected officials doing that. They're not saying, yes, we're going to get there. They're not even acknowledging that we have to get there. That's the very first step, is to know that the only way that we're going to have a livable planet where our economy and our well-being in society work together, where we don't worry about societal collapse because of all of the stresses of flooding and disaster funding and people being displaced and food production problems. The only way we're going to do this is to get together and say, yes, we have a problem and we're going to get there. So the second point out of the blog post is that we need our elected officials to say that we're going to get to net zero emissions. So I want to take this target that the Manitoba government has put out, and it was 1 megaton. Now Manitoba currently has 21 megatons, maybe 22 megatons of emissions annually. So if we go down 1 megaton in a 5-year period, and we're at 22, we're going to need 21 more 5-year periods, and the math on that I think gets us somewhere around 105 years. That is the commitment that the Manitoba government has given us on acting on climate. So now, please, if we can answer a poll question, do you think that the Manitoba government's emissions target through 2022 is enough? And I guess the second portion of it, if my talented assistant Alex, typing away on the keyboard, if she can also ask there, is do you agree that elected officials in Manitoba have to commit to net zero emissions? So what we've seen working on this file for years, since Premier Pallister was elected, and this government, since the previous government, we haven't seen our provincial elected officials moving and committing to levels that are actually going to do the job they need to do, right? We're just not seeing it from our provincial elected officials. But I need you to think about the fact that there are 3 other levels of elected officials in Manitoba. We have chiefs and council, First Nations, elected officials. They have an ability to enact policies, begin talking, working on education campaigns, see how they can move their policies forward. We have the federal government. So we have our MPs who are elected. We can talk to our MPs and say we need a real emissions target, we need real action. which doesn't include building more fossil fuel infrastructure. Pipelines, god damn it. Not going to swear too much on the live feed. So the other one, of course, is municipalities. And now municipalities in Manitoba are the ones that are seeing the emergency firsthand. You're working on whether or not you're going to be able to afford to put in a new road or fire system or expand your water lines or your water treatment plant. These are things that are going on your annual council. Maybe someone's land needs to be rezoned. And then suddenly you get 120 millimeters of rain and you have to roll out emergency response, and these people with day jobs who are only elected to do this kind of part-time are left with this emergency. And it's not just happening once a year. It's not just happening 3 times a year. It's constant. We're seeing constant emergency, and the rural municipalities are having to deal with that. Now, you probably have a bigger relationship with your RM, in this case the city of Winnipeg, than St. Boniface. This is Matt Allard's riding. So I have seen him out and talking about climate and things like that and nature. You probably have a better relationship with your municipal elected official than you do with your provincial one. Now, on our website, we have something called the On Climate Communities. Let's try that again. Alex, can you help me with the name of it, please? Alex will come up with the name of it. It's an escalator, which once you type in your information or where you are, it'll give you contact information for your municipality.
The Post-Carbon Communities Escalator.
The Post-Carbon Communities Escalator. This isn't a campaign that I'm working on. This is my colleague Peter who has run that one. I'm going to apologize to Peter for not getting his campaign name right. But if you find the link in our comments here, you'll see a way that you can reach out and contact your municipal officials. We know the provincial officials from their paltry 1 megaton target and their timeline, which is going to take us 105 years to reach the place where we have a zero emissions and we can begin to approach a stable climate. Talk to your municipal elected officials, because our provincial ones have been garbage. All right, so those are the 2 points I want in that op-ed that I published, the blog post. I want to mention a couple more pieces here. We had 15,000 people on the streets of Winnipeg last September asking for the provincial government to act. And one of the things that the Youth for Climate Action in Manitoba and in Winnipeg and all over the world were asking for is they were asking for governments to declare a climate emergency. This is what we've got. We've got RMs all over the place saying, we've got an emergency. I'm sitting in my front yard on the edge of the park in the river in July. This is not flood time. July is not flood time. If some of you saw my winter work, I was skating here because we had record rain in October over the Thanksgiving, and the entire river came up and then froze like that. The entire forest was a skating rink. So that is 4 different times outside of the regular spring flooding that this area has flooded. The Seine River has come up over its banks. I don't usually dip my hand in the water while I'm gesticulating wildly on camera. So we have a climate emergency here. We need the government, all elected officials, to move forward on that. I want to tell you about funding, how we look from an economic perspective, right? Economists, climate action is really expensive, and we want to keep going business as usual, trying to ramp back up to business as usual after COVID-19. Well, the IPCC, which I had referenced earlier, has stated that they believe that 2.5% of gross domestic product should be spent each and every year till 2035 in order to address climate change. So we need that for mitigation measures to reduce, the big ones in the province are transportation. We need to get fossil fuels out of our transportation. We need to get fossil fuels out of our house heating. We need more house and industrial building heating. We need more efficient buildings. And of course, agriculture. We've got to get fossil fuels out of agriculture and lower the man-made emissions from agriculture. Those are the big three in Manitoba. So we need to be spending 2.5% of our gross domestic product. Gross domestic product in Manitoba is roughly $68 billion. I think that was a 2019 number. And 2.5% of that, quick math, is $1.7 billion. Now, the Conservation and Climate Department, for the 14 years that I've been working for the Wilderness Committee, has been spending about $140 million a year. Now there's other departments spending a little bit, but $140 million compared to $1.7 billion is less than 1/10 of what governments around the world are saying we should be spending on climate mitigation. Manitoba government, get it together. Like, this data is here. We know these things. Now I'm going to give you one more nut piece before I talk about the last point in my blog post. The radicals, the left-wing crazies at the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, the big economic bankers, you know, those radicals, they're saying that they estimate that 6.5% of gross domestic product is an unwitting subsidy to of environmental and energy costs. That means that we're allowing damage to happen, but we're not charging for it, and we should be charging for it. Now, $5.3 trillion, how do you put that into perspective, right? Like, that's just not even a number that you can work with. But it's 6.5%, they say, of GDP we're wasting. We should be charging businesses for the damage they're doing to the environment. And once we charge that, then we start getting money. That's the IMF saying we're totally undercutting our environmental practices and it's going to cause us harm in the future. The IMF. Calm down. Last point, before I go to questions, hopefully Alex will be able to read out some questions to me. The last point I made was that we need to see the media talking about the fact that this is climate chaos. The COVID-19 has been front and center emergency, and rightly so, for over 4 months now. It's a test run. We see COVID denial, we see people, it's not real. This is the same pattern we see on climate, and people saying, oh, we don't really need to act on it. And then when people don't act, if we look at the tragedy unfolding in the United States, we see what happens if we don't act on it. That's a model for us on climate. It's a model in that we need to talk about it. The only way we're going to get to it is that every time we see a media story, we need to talk about the fact that this is climate chaos. And we've seen some great work from reporters. The Free Press hired a reporter just to cover climate. They had an op-ed last weekend, which, oddly enough, I wrote and submitted virtually the same time they published. One saying the same thing, that we have to look around and say this is climate change happening around us. So it is happening. When you see a media report that doesn't talk about climate change, when we talk about emergencies and extreme weather event, well, we should, send a message over to them in a polite way. Their media is struggling to get the message out on a shoestring budget. So I think that was the last point I wanted to make. Alex, do you have any questions for me?
I do, but you should also remind people to sign up for our action alerts.
I am also going to take the time right now to say that to hear about the things that we're doing, about our myriad campaigns, we need you to sign up for our email action alerts through our website, wildernesscommittee.org. We don't hit you with a million things. They're short messages, and it's really critical because the way that we're going to solve all of this is with community and with more people getting involved. Yes, Alex, can you give me a question, please?
Okay. What are some things we in the government can do to get to net zero emissions here in Manitoba?
That's a great question. It's something I had meant to mention. I have a really interesting idea. The number of municipalities we have in Manitoba, virtually every single one of them, they probably have work vehicles. They probably have a work vehicle. And the thing about our rural municipality, it's probably only 50 kilometers across. So your headquarters in whatever community it is, whether it's in Deloraine or whether it's in whatever small community that has the RM office in it, or if it's Souris, somewhere like that, you think about how far they have to drive, it's not very far. So what if the Manitoba government, to help out these municipalities, put in a charging station, an electric vehicle charging station, because the electricity that's generated in Manitoba is very low carbon. It's not without its problems and the impact of hydro on northern communities, Indigenous communities being grossly affected by the way that Manitoba Hydro manages water, but our electricity is low carbon. And if we want to displace fossil fuels, every single municipality in Manitoba should be given a charging station, every single one. And then, you know what we should do is the Manitoba government should also give every single municipality an electric vehicle. There it is in rural Manitoba. There's a charging station that people can use when they drive to town to drop their kids off at the soccer pitch, if they're coming in for the curling bonspiel, if they just need to come to town to have coffee at the coffee shop. They can look and see that an electric vehicle is working in rural Manitoba. That's one simple thing that we can ask the provincial government to do, and municipalities can be like, yeah, you know what? This is something we should have. It's showing leadership, which is essential. It's giving people a taste. It's sitting right there. There's my electric vehicle that my town owns. We can see how it works. Look, it was minus 32 and they got in and started and drove and they came back and it worked, and that's away we move. The other pieces that we need to really move on are not expanding fossil fuels, because this week sitting at my desk, I'm reviewing a expanded peat operation for Berger Peat outside the town of Oakbank. And I am looking at expanded oil and gas drilling by Tundra Oil and Gas in the Whitewater Wildlife Management Area, which should be a protected area in Manitoba, but it's not, because just like our provincial parks, our wildlife management areas aren't completely protected. So people need to comment to their elected officials and say there are distinct things. Now, being able to carpool, right, get fossil fuels off the way, with the ability to the sort of the stay-at-home summer we're having, people are going to limit their air travel. That's a wonderful thing. Kind of go travel with some friends to go camping at a place in Manitoba. That's really what I'm encouraging. Not only do we attach ourselves to nature, which is the critical piece, attachment to nature is going to be the thing that saves humanity and our climate, but it also is going to lower our emissions. Put a bunch of people in a car and go, people that are in your bubble, people that you're interacting with, and go see one of Manitoba's provincial parks or a natural area, or visit an Indigenous area that the community is open, having people come in, like Little Limestone Lake in northern Manitoba. Do we have any more questions, Alex?
Yes. Somebody wants to know, are there fish in that river that you can eat?
That is a great question. My favorite topic when I talk on water, because I'm the water and wildlife campaigner, wilderness and water campaigner, is swim, drink, fish. Now, I haven't started because I've just moved to the banks of the Seine River. I haven't started it yet, but I will be documenting all of those things on the Seine River in Winnipeg while I do this in other places. Now, what we need to think about, when I was growing up, we could do all of those things. We could swim in the water, we could drink the water, and we could fish from the water. Now, somebody might have seen a video of mine on Twitter. This very lawn chair, sitting here in the shade, there were fish swimming behind it, sitting in the shade, while I looked at it and said, well, I can't really go use my chair because it's in the water, where it is now. I haven't tried to eat fish out of this river. I think people do eat fish out of this river. We do fish. We've caught, we haven't caught any on hook and line, but we never caught some carp on nets with my son, my 12-year-old, out here having some fun. But whether or not we should be eating fish that come out of the Seine River is an answer that I will have for you in future Wilderness Committee work. Right, swimming in the rivers, drinking, and fishing. And that all comes from the Lake Ontario Waterkeepers. They originated that phrase, and I think it's fabulous, and I try and put that out to everybody about our water. If you can't swim in it, drink in it, from it, or fish in it, then we're doing something wrong with our water, and we have to do better. Whew, that is a long coffee talk. I'm sure I'm over my limit. So, again, if you go and find our post-carbon community escalator, it'll give you a tool so you can reach out to your municipal elected officials. The government of Manitoba, no matter how many times we reach out to them, they are not doing the job that they've been elected to do. It's as simple as that. There are no scientists that are saying, yeah, the Manitoba government's really got it together on climate. It's not to say that the previous Manitoba government or other governments across the country, if we have to compare ourselves to Alberta or Ontario, that's some pretty bad company. But reach out to your municipal officials, because they also have sway with the province. Reach out to your chief and council and ask them what they're going to do. And if you have more questions about this, reach out to the Wilderness Committee and we'll talk through. Working with the Climate Action Team, my last shout out, we are producing a community climate change guide. We're working on the different pillars of nature and transportation and human impacts. We'll be publishing that in the next couple of months, and with that, it's a living document where there are a lot of suggestions that are specific to Manitoba, taken from jurisdictions around the world, that say these are things that will work here. It's the type of thing that the Manitoba government shouldn't be doing, but you've already got my message. The Manitoba government isn't doing their job. But you'll see it coming from the Climate Action Team, which the Wilderness Committee is one of the key organizers with. So that's it from the banks of the Seine River and the River House in my flooded out potato garden. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again sometime. Thank you.